This week is a special week as it's Zoe's 4th birthday. That surely means it's time for an update. Let me talk state of health, failed batteries and motor bearing failures, as well as how the year has gone overall. Hello everyone, I'm Andrew. Thanks for joining me on the electric transition. Firstly, let me start by thanking you for watching the channel. You helped me narrowly avoid an embarrassing problem recently. I nearly made a major mistake, but the fact that I have the channel saved my blushes. A couple of weeks ago, I was letting my mind wander and started thinking what videos I had coming up, what topics I needed to start preparing for. We're nearly into June, I thought, so I must be due an update on Zoe about now. Oh, interesting. I wonder when my MOT is due. The MOT is an annual safety inspection here in the UK, and it is usually due on each anniversary of the car's registration, starting from when it reaches 3 years old. So it was the channel that made me realise that Zoe was in need of one, and that I had nearly missed it this year. I usually create a calendar entry on my phone for about a month before my MOT is due, so I can get it booked and sorted in good time. But it seems I never created that calendar entry for her. Fortunately, the MOT station I like to use had a shorter than usual wait time, and I was able to get an inspection at quite short notice, which of course she sailed through. She is only 4 years old after all. MOTs had started to become a bit of a trial with my old car, my 1999 Smart 42. That car started to fail MOTs, usually on emissions, triggering a rapid series of fixes to get her through again for another year. It usually turned out to be nothing serious. A blown exhaust 1 year, a sensor clean fixed it another time, but that emissions problem started to become more prevalent and recurred a time or two more. A trip to an independent smart specialist sorted that eventually, as the first thing they did when I arrived was check for a blocked breather pipe, which sure enough was totally blocked. When that breather pipe becomes blocked, pressure from the crankcase forces oil into unusual places, and that was what was fouling the mass airflow sensor. Sorting emissions failures can be difficult, as it's not always clear why an engine isn't running quite right. It can take time to track down the fault, and changing bits as part of diagnosing the issue can start to get expensive. That's one of the reasons I am over internal combustion and very glad to be driving electric. I said that very thing to the guy at the MOT centre, who said they were seeing an increasing number of ICE cars fail emissions tests at younger and younger ages. It turns out that clean combustion is really hard, and so that's something I am glad I don't have to deal with anymore. My EV will never fail an MOT on emissions, well, not from the drivetrain anyway. At 4 years old though, it needed a new traction battery, that big expensive one under the car. Well, at least that's what the naysayers would have you believe. However, that's not really a thing. Don't get me wrong, there is a chance of a traction battery failing eventually, but it's tiny in reality. I did a check on the traction battery's state of health using an OBD2 dongle, a technique I've discussed in a previous video, which I will link to in the description. The result of the check came out at 95.5%. Average UK mileage is something like 8,000 miles a year. That's roughly 13,000 kilometres for those overseas. For a car doing that, as mine is, my rule of thumb is that 2% degradation is expected in the first year and 1% per year after that. After 4 years, that rule of thumb would result in a state of health of 95%, so mine at 95.5% is bang on expectations. All good there. After 4 years, however, one battery might need replacement, or at least checking, and that is the 12-volt accessory battery under the bonnet. I put a voltmeter on mine recently to see how it was doing. I opened the bonnet and then locked the car, clipped the meter onto the battery and then waited. The Renault ZOE is slightly unusual in that it powers up its high voltage system when you unlock the car rather than when you turn it on, and we don't want to measure the voltage of the 12 volt while that is powered up. If we did, then we'd be measuring the wrong voltage. Instead of measuring the battery, we'd instead be measuring the output of the DC to DC converter. That converter is the equivalent of an alternator in an internal combustion engine car. It's what keeps the accessory battery charged in an EV, which it does by outputting a higher voltage than the battery's resting state. On older ZOEs, we need to wait for about 15 minutes for the car to power down completely. However, on mine, the voltage seemed to drop almost instantly. Even so, I took an initial reading, left it 3 hours to settle after its last use, and then read it again. A reading of 12.7 volts isn't too bad. That doesn't suggest much of a problem, at least as far as we can tell with a very simple test like this. I'll probably recheck it towards the winter though, just to keep an eye on it from here on out. The 12 volt battery will need replacing eventually. It is a consumable on an EV, just as in an ICE car. However, it doesn't have to be done strictly to a schedule, so I'll hang on for the time being. I think it's okay for now. The next item we are told we will eat through as EV owners is tyres. I'm at 27,200 miles and I've replaced one of the front tyres, but due to a puncture rather than excessive wear. The other front tyre has about 3.5 millimetres of tread remaining, so I'll need to keep a closer eye on that from here on in as well. However, the rear tyres are at 4 and 4.5 millimetres, so they are both fine. Maybe the naysayers have that wrong too then. Who'd have thought they might have said anything untrue? There is one extra piece of maintenance I did get done this year, an additional spend over and above the annual service, and that is to get the air conditioning system regassed. It was still working fine, but it was making a strange popping noise occasionally, and ZOEs do need a bit of a top-up occasionally, so it seemed sensible to get that sorted. Apparently it was pretty low on refrigerant. They vacuum tested the system and it passed without a problem, so they topped it up with gas and lubricant, and hopefully it should be good for another 3 years or so. If you have a ZOE and you hear a strange noise from the car, a bit like someone gently flexing the sides of a drinks can, then get the refrigerant topped up. The air pump system is used not only to heat or cool the cabin, but also to manage the battery temperature, so it's an important circuit that you want functioning at its best. A friend who is into cars has asked several times what I would replace the ZOE with if I were to change it. However, to me, the question doesn't entirely make sense. Why would I change something that's been doing such a great job for me? Having said that, if I were to wave a magic wand and modify things on the car, there are a couple of aspects that I would have adjusted. The first is that the rear seats don't fold down flat. That's really frustrating, as the slope created when you put them down is very impractical. Anything you put on the seat back once folded immediately slides back towards the boot, which is quite annoying. It makes loading her up with kit a bit more difficult than it should be. In the past, I've said that you can take the seat back out to overcome this limitation, but it turns out that this is actually out-of-date advice, at least for my car. This was possible in the original cars, which had the single folding bench seat design. However, when they added the 60-40 split folding rear seat, they didn't carry that feature across. The outer seat fixing points can still be undone very easily with a small tool, but the inboard fixing points are not made to be undone easily, so taking them out is not an option for me, and that's a great shame. The other thing that I might change is the range. Well, sort of. Range is a funny one. It is possible now to get a car with too much range. There are numerous cars on the market that should avoid you needing to recharge en route for most trips. But in a way, I'm glad I don't have that much. A year or so ago, I watched a video by someone with a Nissan Ariya, a car with a lot of range, and he was explaining how, after 3 years of ownership, he was a bit nervous about an upcoming trip. You see, his car had so much range that this journey would be just the second in his ownership where he would need to use a DC rapid charger. And that made him a bit apprehensive. He wasn't used to rapid charging, and so he was a bit nervous about doing so. He hadn't been exercising that muscle, and so it was out of the ordinary for him. Sure enough, when he got to do it, he wasn't confident in knowing what to do and whether it was his fault when it didn't seem to stop on command. In a way, that is what I think is a problem with a car with that much range. In contrast, I don't feel apprehensive anymore when using a DC rapid charger because I've done it quite a lot. I actually appreciate having had a car with just 200 miles of range on average because it's made me use the chargers a bit more, and with frequency comes familiarity. I have exercised the rapid charging muscle and therefore exorcised that demon. I've got used to what's different about having an EV, and now I feel comfortable when I go out and about. Having said that, having another 20 miles of range, another 5 kilowatt hours or so of capacity would save me an occasional stop, which might be handy for one specific type of trip, and that is the day trip, out and back in a single day. It is common for me to do 100 miles to get somewhere, then meet up and do something with people, and finally return home again that night. I like to have a bit of range in reserve. On some trips that are a bit more hilly, that's about 30 miles, and so having a bit more in the tank would allow that without a public charge at all. So maybe I would prefer a tiny bit more next time around, or if the battery fairy comes calling one night. However, I do need to be exercising that DC rapid charging skill a bit, so I don't want too much. It was that rapid charging skill that meant I wasn't nervous about the trip to Everything Electric in Harrogate, a slightly longer trip than I do on a regular basis. I did do a few minutes planning, looking up what charging options there were on the way, which I showed in another video on the channel. I will link to that one from the description as well. As you may remember though, if you watched that one, it was as much about finding the most cost-effective chargers as just finding any chargers. Charging is very prolific now. In most places, it's not about finding a charger, it's about finding a reasonably priced one. What was interesting about that trip to Harrogate was what happened on the way home. As I glid along the M1 southbound, I felt a sense of the freedom of the road, something I hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't caused by being in an EV, well, not entirely anyway, although the car being so quiet certainly helped. I don't know what they surfaced that bit of the M1 with, but it's very quiet, and that added to the natural quiet of driving an EV due to the lack of an engine. It was wonderfully peaceful. That sense was also heightened by there being very light traffic on the road too. That might be because of the time of day I chose, a Saturday afternoon. But I wonder too if it was that some people were avoiding driving because of the price of fuel at that point. I think the feeling I got was mostly because of my body behaving itself. The only real anxiety I had on the trip was whether I would become uncomfortable in the seat because of doing so much driving in one go. When the discomfort didn't happen, when not too many bits of me ached, and even those that did not too badly, that brought about a sense of relief. But what is interesting is that this feeling of freedom arose in an EV. There are people who think, before they try one, that driving something with limited range will be very restrictive. In fact, what you quickly find once you do have one is that the main restriction is you, the driver, and not the car. That's if you're driving a modern EV anyway, one with a couple of 100 miles of range at least. And certainly my experience seems to confirm that. Here was I, enjoying the freedom, even whilst in an EV. Perhaps not so restrictive after all then. It's a common phrase, isn't it? That it's the small things in life that make a difference. and there are a couple of small things that do make a difference to my experience of the ZOE. The first is the charge flap. Its central location never seems to cause me a problem. I can seem to charge from anything without any fuss. But the second is more important, and that's the design of the inner water-resistant flap. I really like how easy it is to open, with its small spring getting it straight out of the way, and the clip to hold it back in when done. I watch with disappointment review after review showing those nasty rubber bungs used by other manufacturers and thinking how frustrating they must be to use. The charging flap is something you are going to interact with a lot in the life of an EV, so the manufacturer, having spent a few pence more on making it robust and pleasant to use, is well worth it. I think that flap on the ZOE is something other manufacturers should consider. But that's not the only one. The other thing that needs more people's attention is the lane departure warning. The ZOE has lane keep assist, but it's not very good. It bounces between the lane lines. However, the next level of assistance down is lane departure warning, where the ZOE monitors your position in your lane and warns you if it thinks you are straying outside of it. There are two things about the lane departure warning that are excellent. The first is that it never seems to false trigger. If it warns me, then it's pretty much right. But the second is that it doesn't beep as a warning. Instead, it vibrates the steering wheel. That's genius. I never switch the system off because it isn't unnecessarily invasive. It gets its point across without bullying me, without barking at me like I'm a child. I think that's a much better way of interacting with the driver, and as a result it's a much safer system because it can stay on instead of immediately being turned off on every journey. I do wonder if Euro NCAP have rather lost their way with safety. They really need to learn that annoying systems get turned off and require manufacturers to make them less intrusive than they currently are. A system saves nobody when it's off. So, what will I be replacing the ZOE with? Hopefully nothing. It's doing a great job. It's probably the best car I've ever owned. There are a couple of inconveniences, with that back seat being one of them, but at the same time there are a few features that I know I wouldn't get in any competitor, which I really appreciate, and so I'm happy with what I've got. Motor bearings are a bit of an Achilles heel with the ZOE, of course, but at just over 27,000 miles, any issues with mine should be a good way off yet. And maybe me being a little gentle with her might help avoid that too. No, hopefully ZOE will be with me a long time yet. 3.5 years into my ownership and we're still in the honeymoon period. Well, there we go. There are my thoughts on the Renault ZOE after 3.5 years of ownership. I hope you've enjoyed it and got something from it. If you have and you'd like to show your support for what I'm doing, then there's a link to the Buy Me a Coffee website in the video description. A drink would be very gratefully received. What's more, if you've liked the video, then it is a big help to me if you click the thumbs up button. And I'd love to have you as a subscriber of the channel if you want to see more from me. Subscribing is free and helps ensure you know about any future videos I make. Finally, I hope to interact with some of you in the comments. I hope a number of you will join in the conversation down there. Tell me what you think about your current Steed. What have you got and what do you appreciate about it? Does your car have any features that you wish other manufacturers would adopt, or anything you think they should drop? Let me have your thoughts in the comments section. I look forward to hearing what you have to say about today's subject. Thanks.